It is my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Laura McGuire, who's going to speak to us today about ancient spirituality, colonization, and decolonization. Dr. Laura, they, them, or she, her, is an internationally recognized consultant, survivor, researcher, seminarian, and author. Dr. McGuire earned the bachelor's degree in social sciences from Thomas Edison State University and their graduate degree in educational leadership for change from Fielding Graduate University. They're currently earning their Master's of Divinity degree at Earlham Seminary, where they are studying the intersection of Judaism, trauma-informed care, and restorative justice in faith settings. Dr. McGuire is also a certified full-spectrum doula, professional teacher, certified sexual health educator, and a vinyasa yoga instructor. They're certified of the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists, and the Society of Professional Consultants. Quite a resume. Dr. Laura McGuire, thank you so much for speaking with us today. We very much appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Hello, everyone. It is a huge honor to be here. And I loved hearing everyone's joys and enthusiasm. I agree. I think there's a lot to be excited for as we go into the end of this year and the beginning of the next. Today, I'm going to share some slides with you. Let me know that we can see them. Can we see them?
Yes.
Awesome. So my conversation today, I think, is really wonderful as we go into the season of the fall and the winter, because this is a time when so often we get this incredible opportunity to deeply reflect on those who came before us, right? If anyone ever celebrates Samhain or Halloween, the Day of the Dead, All Saints, All Souls Day, right? All of these holidays around the same time ask us to think about, where have we come from, right? We didn't fall out of a coconut tree, as we all know, and we exist in this beautiful context of our ancestors and our community. And I'm going to share with you a little bit today about my personal journey in exploring that, but also ask you to engage with internal inquiry around what your ancestors' spirituality means to you. Now, maybe that's something you've already thought a lot about, but maybe that's new. And the thing that I like to always consider when we discuss this is stepping back and realizing that our past is very much our present. So many times I teach on trauma. It's one of my main areas of expertise as a scholar. And people think about any kind of trauma or any kind of situation that created disharmony as existing in this one little corner of time, right? This event happened and then we moved on and life went on and things evolved and we're not there anymore. But the reality is that all of those experiences are still whispers in our heart and our soul. So one of the things that I like to highlight for people, especially we're talking about colonization and its impact, which was a profoundly traumatic event, no matter what part of the world our ancestors come from, is that that is still very much echoing in our current world today. And I think sometimes, especially as you use, we can get in this bubble of feeling like, we've left some of that past stuff behind, or we're not impacted by some of the toxicity of colonization and its views on religion and spirituality. And we do this disservice by ignoring that, right? Or pretending like, oh yeah, washed our hands of it, we're good now. We have to continue to reflect and look back. And one of the ways that we can do that is through understanding ancestor veneration. Now, I'm sure many of you have an ancestor veneration practice, or maybe you've heard of it and you're curious to explore it more. But ancestor veneration in my seminary studies, more than any professor or any class, changed my life the most. I started to get really curious about how colonization had impacted my family's history. And again, this is something we can all recognize, whether our ancestors are from the Americas, Europe, Asia, Africa, anywhere on the planet, colonization had an impact there. And so many of these beautiful traditions and rituals and these nuggets of wisdom that our ancestors would have loved to teach us directly are no longer available in that format, right? Those got subsided and suppressed because of patriarchy and the powers that be. But spiritually, we can continue to engage with them, because the wonderful thing about the spiritual realm is it's not constrained by just the here and now. And I love another thing about this, which is we have science to support this knowledge as well, right? This isn't just something that we can say, yes, okay, spiritual, metaphysical. Maybe you're a non-theist and you're like, okay, I did not sign up for that. No, thank you, Dr. McGuire. Take it somewhere else. And that's fine, right? But scientifically, we have this emerging evidence that these memories really are being whispered into our minds and hearts all the time. And we have that evidence through a field called epigenetics. Now, epigenetics is often misunderstood, and sometimes people really go far-reaching with what the data has found. And, again, science person, I have to be like, okay, we have limited data, but it's still really important to acknowledge, because it started in the 1960s. Scientists were fascinated by what they were observing in the grandchildren and children of Holocaust survivors. Now, they knew that the parents or grandparents had survived something profound. And obviously, that was going to have an impact on their bodies, right? And their minds, even their ability to overcome certain things, their ability to regulate stress, digestive system, all of these systems of our body, right, that are impacted by traumatic stress. But what they were observing was that the children and grandchildren of those individuals were having very similar impacts. Now, here's the good news of that as well, which is they weren't only observing negative repercussions, they were also observing certain decreases in risks and increase in resiliency. And by studying the RNA and the DNA of these individuals, they were able to see, oh my gosh, they are actually retaining some of the cellular memory of their parents and grandparents. Now, we know we have enough evidence now that this lasts at least 3 generations. But what gets me really excited is that in other mammals, we can measure epigenetic memory up to about 12 generations. And what this tells us is it might be going back to the 1400s for some of us, or it could just be our grandparents, but they also retain the memories of their grandparents, right? And that on that cellular level, our body is always communicating with our ancestors. Their memories, their experiences, both the difficulties that they've navigated and the resiliency that they built to survive, are very much present in us, both on a metaphysical and a physiological level. So what does this ask us to do, right? These memories that are very much part of our present. Well, it asks us to really think about the way that we think about theology and the way that we think about theism, if that is something that we connect with. And one of the things that I think comes up the most, at least in my observation of people who are starting to step away from maybe some of the traditions they grew up with that really aren't working for them anymore, is letting go of hierarchy. Now, this is so challenging, right? We're used to an authority figure telling us this is how it is. But as you use, we're probably the most primed to step away from it, right? We are often people who love to question and love to poke at things and love to discuss and debate. And that's also something that's very common in Judaism. We're a religion of arguing. But there is so much beauty in that, right? We can move away from saying, okay, this person's the ultimate authority on anything, and saying, I can get pieces of wisdom from all different kinds of teachers. I know Thich Nhat Hanh was mentioned. He's a big author that we cite in my seminary studies, right? There's wisdom in these people, but ultimately, we all have a direct connection to truth. And the thing that goes along with that I observe so much is this fear of doing things the right way. A month ago, I was going to a wonderful meetup for tarot, and all these people gathered together, and we brought our oracle cards or our tarot cards and did readings for each other. And people were at different stages of their practice. There were those who have been doing it for a long time. I've been doing readings for over a decade. There were people who were just getting into it and people who were just getting back into the practice. But there was this one woman who was really struggling. And it touched my heart so much because what she kept saying over and over again was, I don't know if I'm doing this right. She would ask a question or she would pull a card and she'd say, but I don't know. I don't know. I might be getting this wrong. I don't know. I haven't been properly instructed. I might be wrong. You know, I'm just tiptoeing here. I don't want to say the wrong thing. And that is such a hallmark of the colonized mindset, right? Is that we need someone to anoint what we're doing, to anoint our practice and say, yes, approved. Or we feel like it's something wrong, we're doing something wrong. And so moving away from that, that's what I shared with her. I said, you know, there is no authority telling you how you have to interpret anything. No one is going to come in and correct you. And even if someone has a lot of experience and authority in certain ways, ultimately they're just a person and spirit is connecting to you directly. And the last thing I think that so feeds into all of this is unlearning how we think of a divine being. So many of us have grown up with fearful images of anything supernatural, much less this ultimate divine authority, and that they're angry and critical and demeaning and picking apart our every thought and every action, instead of going back to those indigenous spiritual practices, right? In all religions, there is an indigenous root, a taproot. And what we find as a common thread in those examples of a god is that the most ancient gods were friends. They did not ask to be served. They did not ask for offerings. The most basic forms of theism that we have a historical record of, they were more friends with humanity, colleagues, peers, cheering us on, guiding us, offering wisdom and support, but not towering over us, demanding a certain kind of practice. And so when we come back into this space where we have this new vision of the divine, there can also be this real need for mourning. And it's fascinating, the kismet of this, because I gave this talk, this sermon one more time a few years ago, and it was at this exact week, and I have not planned that either time. We were offered multiple dates. This was the one that worked, but this is the week in the Jewish calendar of Tisha B'Av, and Tisha B'Av is the week of mourning. And so it's a really powerful time to remember our past, remember what our ancestors have gone through, and to just let that pass through us, all those feelings, both the joy and the remembrance and what they've done, but also the deep sorrow. Again, even just the sorrow of losing some of this direct history and collective memory. But in that mourning, we can then come out of it and move forward and reclaim some of this heritage and wisdom. Now, for myself, I went on this journey about 6 months into my seminary studies. So I came in as a Christian Quaker. I'm going to a Quaker seminary that has a UU partnership. And that's how I thought I was going to leave. But I read this wonderful book that was a really deep dive into ancestor veneration. And the ancestors really did start chatting with me. And I wanted to learn more about my mother's family and their history, because there were a lot of traditions that were kind of mysterious. They had certain practices, certain terms for things, certain ways of preparing food, all different kinds of stuff that we really couldn't explain. And I started to look into this a little more and started to do some genetic studies, and all of this led me to realizing that there was a ton of evidence that they were probably part of the Inquisition in Portugal and in Italy. And as part of the Inquisition, they were the B'nai Enosim, the children of the forced converts. So in order for us to continue on, they made the choice to choose life, which meant letting go of their traditions and their faith and going along with the Christian hegemony. As a child, I had always been fascinated with Judaism, and I even had a little menorah that I painted for Hanukkah, and shouldn't have done that. That was cultural appropriation, I realize now, but I just, as a 7-year-old child, felt like this was something I was supposed to do. And so in doing this research, I started to get back into those practices of understanding more of what they were. And then I connected with a rabbi who specializes in helping people return to the Jewish faith if it was part of their ancestry, Rabbi Barbara Aiello. And so I got to study with her for a year. And then I went to the exact city-state where my ancestors lived, where she has a synagogue, and I completed my return ceremony in the mikvah, which is kind of what, if you grew up in Christianity, kind of think of like a baptism, right? But it's a ritual that is immersing yourself in water, saying certain prayers, and then you come out refreshed. So here are some pictures of me doing that. On the picture over here on the far left, we have my great-grandmother whose ring I wear every day and I have since I was 16 years old. And she definitely was one of the clues to this history. Some of her practices, her family names, her traditions, and her genetics all gave me evidence to point towards this. And then on the far right, you can see myself in the Mediterranean Sea with one of the rabbis who is part of the Bet Din, which is a council of rabbis, saying my prayers and immersing myself in these beautiful, beautiful waters to return home. And in the middle is the picture of me arriving on the shore, surrounded by those who are also going through the same journey, embraced by my rabbi, and really coming to a different place with appreciating and understanding what decolonizing my faith and also addressing the spiritual trauma in my family history meant for me. As we close this conversation today, I want you to reflect on 2 questions. I know I have one written here. And the first one is, yes, how has colonization impacted your family line, your ancestors, and their spirituality? But the second question I love to pose to people is, when you have time, to take a moment and really meditate and reflect and imagine what God, this concept, this divinity, would have felt like to your ancestors 10,000 years ago. So not 1 generation or 2 generations, right? But as far back as you can imagine. Imagine them waking up, hearing birds, seeing the sun, watching things grow, observing the seasons and all of their mysteries, understanding plants and their medicines, right? All of these things that our earliest ancestors were just uncovering. And what would their relationship with something bigger and beyond them and beautiful and mysterious, what would that look like? What would that feel like in their body? And I think by doing that practice, by meditating and reflecting on these things, we can start to tweak and alter our spiritual practices or just appreciating our ancestors' experiences in ways that transform us today. Thank you so much.